Name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Big blessing to be with you guys tonight and continue the beautiful story of Esther. I might just do what I did last time and very quickly read chapter 8 for you guys, because I don't think anyone wants, unless anyone wants to read. No, okay. So, name of the Father. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that would come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen?" Then King Ahasuerus said to the queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hands on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke." So the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded, the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes, and the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses bred from swift steeds. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews, who were in every city, to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, to plunder their possessions. On one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan, the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and every city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. So, sorry, I know it's very long, but I think this chapter could be spoken about a lot. I think there's a lot to be broken down. There's a lot of beautiful interpretations, especially from the church fathers, to look through. So God willing, I just want to share a few points, and hopefully the Holy Spirit will give each and every one of us a small message, something small. And it's interesting that, and it talks about how the Jews celebrate it to this day. As we've touched on many times during this series, to this day, Jewish people celebrate the Feast of Purim, the feast of, celebrating the fact that this great annihilation was basically counteracted and stopped by God, and it became a really beautiful thing. And actually, interestingly, what they do is, on that 13th day of the month of Adar, and if it's a Sabbath, and they'll skip to the 11th, they go at night, and they do the full Jewish rites, and they actually read all of the book of Esther. And then once they say Haman's name, everyone cries out and they say, "Let his name be blotted out." And it's like a full ritualistic thing. And then they come back in the morning, they finish the rites, and then from there on, it's just a big celebration. So to this day, in the Jewish religion, this is celebrated. So there's a few points that I just wanted to share. The first thing is how we see, it's kind of brushed over how Esther goes before the king. Like in the previous chapters, it was such a big thing. And we were acknowledging how this is not the status quo. You just can't just go in front of the king and then we see this courage that she's saying, "If I die, I die. I don't care. I'm going to go and I'm going to represent my people. And it's a big thing. But in this chapter, it's just kind of brushed over that, yeah, she went before the king. It's kind of like an assumed thing. And it's kind of that we see her bravery and we see her courage even more. And we see the principle of, graduation in our spiritual lives, that God sends many, 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 trials and things like that. And by going through them by his grace, we get stronger, we get bigger, we become more like giants of God, more like children of God. And it's easier for us to, by God's grace, to navigate these things, whereas before it might have been difficult because we've been through these things before. And that's kind of what we see there, that she has that courage. There's no, that fear is not even addressed anymore. And Abuna Tadros Yob Malati has a really beautiful contemplation. He's talking about how what she won, like Mordecai kind of won the authority because he got the ring. And it's kind of mirrored in Luke 15 when Jesus gives us the beautiful parable of the prodigal son, and when he returns home, the father gives him the signet ring, the exact same thing, because it represents the authority of the king. If you have a legal document from the king, it's sealed by the signet ring. That shape, that emblem that's on the ring gets sealed in hot wax onto that document. And that's the authority. That's the name of the king, just like we do everything by the name of Christ. He's our king, he's our authority. So Mordecai kind of got that authority. And Father Tadros is saying, what did Esther win? Esther won intimacy because she got to be in the presence of the king when this just was not allowed, even for the queen. It wasn't allowed. Has anyone here, just raise of hands, has anyone been to court here? There's no shame, you don't have to, or seen, does anyone know what happens? Do we have any legal students or lawyers here? Anyone? No, everyone's a doctor? Fair enough. So when you go to court and you address the magistrate, it's very much the same. I don't know if you guys have seen it. When you actually walk into the courtroom, you have to bow. Even if they can't see you, you have to bow. And then when it's your turn to actually come up to the bar table and address the court, you say, "May it please the court, my name is so-and-so, I'm appearing in this matter." Blah, 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 blah. And then you use it's the exact same language that Esther's using, "May it please the king, if I have found favor," if the court pleases, if your honor pleases, I move that this application, blah, 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 blah. It's the exact same language, this exact same formality. And yet she is allowed, he once again extends, like the previous chapter, extends the golden scepter and allows her in and allows her to have that conversation that no one in the kingdom could have with him. And it's kind of like what the bride says in the Song of Songs, which she says that he brings me into his chamber. In verse 5 of the first chapter, he brings me into his chamber. He brings me into the bridal chamber where the king resides, where no one else is allowed to go except his spouse. And that is the intimacy that Esther has won. So when we follow on from everything that we discussed in the previous chapter and we're able to have that courage and we're able to entreat God in that way, we'll win that intimacy. And that's really the most treasured thing that we can win. But the other thing is her compassion. When she says, I don't want to mess this up. What did she say? It's really beautiful. She said, "How can I endure to see the evil," this is verse 6, "the evil that would come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen?" She couldn't bear it. It's not enough that Haman has been dealt with, she's the queen, Mordecai has been raised up, everything's fine. But that's not enough for her. It's not enough for her. She wasn't content to just live that life where she's safe, she's happy, she's protected. Mordecai, who's had her back since the beginning, he's fine. That's not enough for her. She couldn't bear to see her people, her blood, still being persecuted, still feeling that oppression. And it reminded me of what St. Anthony the Great, when he says, "Our life and our death is with our neighbor. If we gain our brother, we have gained God. But if we scandalize our brother, we have sinned against Christ." And it's that understanding that my salvation is 100% completely intertwined with the salvation of those around me. There's no such thing as, God, me and God are fine and that's it, or I'm fine. It doesn't work like that. We are inextricably connected to one another. As it says in the epistles, that we are the body of Christ. If the hand suffers, the foot should suffer with it, all that kind of thing. We should feel that connection. It should be very unnatural to us as Christians if we can see our brothers and sisters who aren't just the people sitting here with us, if we see our brothers and sisters suffering, if we see them in misery, if we see them in need, it's actually very unnatural for us as Christians to be okay with that. We should have the same response that Esther had. And even Moses said something along those lines in Exodus 32 after they had made the golden calf and really stuffed up. And God is like, I'm going to punish them. And Moses says to Moses, who's the friend of God, who had that intimacy with God in the same way, says to God, if they're going to be blotted out, then blot out my name too. Delete my name from the book of life as well. If you're going to destroy these people, I know what they did was so wrong. But if you're going to wipe them out, wipe out my name as well. Like he had that bargaining power to have that conversation with God. And that's really the heart that we should all have. We should have a heart that really is sensitive to the sufferings and the needs of people around us, because otherwise we're really missing the point. Like Jesus says to the Pharisees, like you've missed the whole point of the law, which is mercy and love. You've missed the whole point. And we will be tested on that. We will be asked about, what did we do for the people that are around us? And what love did we show to the people around us when very clearly there was a need, very clearly God maybe put certain people in our path so that we could serve them, and we didn't answer that calling. So that was the first thing that I wanted to share. And the second thing is going back to the legal idea. So it's the whole, and in chapter 1 it talks about how, that authority of the king, once he issues a decree, that's it. It can't be repealed, it can't be revoked, it can't be touched. Like we have a lot of, sometimes you'll see legislation and you can still look it up in the database, you can still read it, but it'll have in brackets repealed. So it's no longer, it's been replaced by another body of legislation or something else, another act has been enacted to whatever that area was. It's very common. And it's funny how the authority of the king just couldn't be touched. Once this decree was out, he's like, it's been written, I can't really do much about it. And it's it's funny how there is a really beautiful symbolism in all of Esther, which I'm only really now starting to scrape the surface of that, how it is really, Mark was saying that it's the only book that doesn't actually expressly mention God and it doesn't seem to have any prophecy. But there's a very clear prophetic tone about the cross and how, and we're going to get into all of that later on, and how from that, on the cross, Christ crushed death. He crushed the devil. He crushed everything. He made possible for us victory. It's kind of like the victory is there and we now have to go and claim it type of thing. And it's the same, Haman is gone. So the symbol of the devil, the symbol of all that problem is gone, but the threat is still there because that decree was still active. The decree couldn't be done away with. So what's the solution? The solution is a new decree that allows the people of God to fight for themselves, to fight back. And that goes back to what we were talking about last week about entreating God to fight for us, in begging him to be involved in the struggle, if it's a temptation or if it's a problem or if it's something just so beyond our grasp and we can't do anything about it, begging him to be involved and fight for us. And that's when we see that the devil will fall and all that kind of stuff. So this is now like last week was like a preamble to what actually allows us to have the victory. So the enemy was kind of defeated, but the threat was still there. And that's kind of what's symbolized through that decree still being there. And what's the solution? To put in a new decree, to put in a new authority. And I guess if you put yourselves in the shoes of the Jewish people, maybe you'd be thinking, well, like God, okay, you promised that you were going to protect us and deliver us and we're going to be your people set apart. And then this big threat comes and then you save us and whatever, but why couldn't you just stop the decree being made in the first place, right? That would be a logical thought, right? Why allow all of this business in the first place? And it kind of reminded me of something that I read during Passion Week in Matthew 27, when the Pharisees are mocking Christ on the cross. He's there hanging, they're mocking him. And they're saying, if you come down, you said that you're going to destroy the temple and rebuild it, and you can't even save yourself. If you come down from the cross, we'll believe in you. That's all we need to see. If you come down, we'll believe in you. If you can, come down and we'll believe in you. And St. Jerome said, they said to him, let him come down from the cross and we'll believe in him. What a deceitful promise. For which is greater, to come down from the cross while still alive, or to rise from the tomb while dead. Yet he rose and you do not believe. Therefore, even if he came down from the cross, you would not believe. Now, what he said is very profound. He said, which is greater, to come down from the cross while still alive, or to rise from the tomb while dead? And it's a really beautiful thing that he's saying there. Like, what is the greater act of glory? To have prevented himself from being crucified, or to be put on the cross and to come down, or to truly taste death and die on the cross and conquer death and rise from the dead? Which one is better? Obviously, to conquer death. Obviously, the resurrection. That's why it is the glory of our church. It's the ultimate victory. Which one would be greater? And if we put it in this situation here, what would be greater? That I stopped from the beginning these schemes, like, kind of put away the free will of these people that had evil schemes and putting all this stuff in place, and I stopped it from ever happening? Or they did that, and I gave you victory over it. I actually gave you power to fight back over the ones that were allowed to kill you and annihilate you when previously you had nothing to fight back with. Which one is the greater deliverance? Which one is the greater show of power? And that idea is actually very consistent through the Gospels and through all of the Bible. And even if you think to the second time, the first time that the apostles were with Christ and there was a storm and the boat, Jesus was with them on the boat and he was asleep, and they said, don't you care? Like, why are you asleep? We're about to die. And then he rebukes the storm. The second time, he wasn't with them. So they were freaking out. Even though it was only, however long after the first time, they were freaking out because it was a greater test, because at least the first time he was there with them. This time they were on their own. And then Christ appears to them, walk in the water, and Peter says, if it's you, command me to walk out to you. And, we have that whole beautiful event that happens. And it's kind of like, well, what would be the greater deliverance? If I stop this storm from ever happening, or if I showed you that the thing that terrifies you the most is actually under my feet by walking on it, and by you realizing that if I command you, you can walk on it as well. Which one is the greater deliverance? Which one is the greater show of God's glory and his power? And which one, which we'll get into at the end of the chapter, gives you more joy? There is so much more joy when we have experienced those things. So maybe to us, logically, we would say about whatever situation X, Y, Z that's happening, like, God, like, okay, I know that all things are possible for you. I know that you can provide when there doesn't seem to be a way out, and you can save me, but like, why would you allow this to happen in the first place? I think that's a very human, I'm sure we've all thought that at one point in time. And I think that St. Jerome gives us the answer. Which one would be greater? Which one would be greater? For me to just prevent this cross, or for me to show you my power and actually give you the victory as well? And that's a really, to me, that's a very beautiful point. What would be better? That we never experience loss, that we never feel the pain of, our loved ones being taken away, or that we learn that he was telling the truth when he says, I'm the resurrection and the life. Which one would be better? When we hit huge roadblocks in our life, or we get to experience what Moses experienced when he was watching the sea being parted? Which one would be better? If it never happened, or if he gets to show us that? Which one would be better? If there's no pain or there's no temptation, or I really feel like the one who was tempting me, you crushed him by your cross. You did. And the pain, your cross can actually make it sweet. Which one would be better? If that never happened, or we get to see his glory, we get to see him working. Sorry, I'm a bit disjointed. That's something else, but I forgot it. Yeah, Matthew Henry touched on that point as well, and he said, from the contrast of the beginning to the end of the chapter, where the Jews are very joyful, which we'll get into, if they had not been threatened and in distress, they would not have had occasion for this extraordinary joy. Thus are God's people sometimes made to sorrow in tears, that they may reap in so much more joy. The suddenness and strangeness of the turns of affairs in their favor added much to their joy. They were like those that dream. Then was their mouth filled with laughter. And he's referencing the Psalms, the Psalm 126, where it says, those that sow in tears shall reap in joy. So These are promises. These are promises that we've all heard many times in the church, but when it comes to their application in our lives, like it's huge. It's very profound. And sometimes God will allow that sorrow, so all the more we can, when we see his hand moving, I think that's what Matthew Henry is touching on when he says the suddenness and the strangeness of the turn of affairs. I'm sure we can all relate to that, where like it's almost comical how like that happened and then oh my God, and then that happened. And then at the end I was like, oh, and you know, like that's God's handwriting. That's how he does things. So that we know without a doubt that was him. It wasn't my own wisdom, it wasn't, you know, whatever, my resilience. God got me out of that situation. God provided when the need was burning so severely. And I'll just go back now to the end of the chapter. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in the royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. Then the Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because of fear of the Jews fell upon them. These are really like amazing verses. That's, if we could have the same description as verse 16, I think we're doing very, very well as Christians. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. That's a very solid description. And basically, it was infectious. It was infectious. All these Gentile people are witnessing the joy that the Jews had, and fear is coming upon them. They're seeing that hand as well. It's not just, and we talked about that last week, how it's not really only just for me. It's very much connected to everyone in my life, and God is moving all these pieces together, and how through that they're also being witnessed to, and they're seeing the hand of God, and their hearts are being converted. And joy is, you know, joy, obviously we can speak about joy for a bajillion years, and there's lots of different writings and things like that. One thing that Abuna Dawood Lamy said recently, and he was talking about evangelism, talking about preaching and the need for preaching. He says, if we say that the sign of soldiers is always being serious, and a sign of the scientist is study, and the sign of a jewelry maker is that they're very precise, the sign of a fisherman is staying all the night fishing and watchfulness, so the sign of evangelist is being joyful. If you lose your joy, you cannot preach, because people will not buy it. They will not go after you. People love to see happy people, and people love to ask you your reason for being happy. So if you're not happy, they will never follow you. Simply, it should never be your sign. Like when you cross yourself, it should be your sign, sorry. Like when you cross yourself, it signifies that you're a Christian. So to be an evangelist, you have to keep the joy of the Spirit. Being joyful by itself is evangelism. One of the major obstacles of the spiritual joy is the lack of prayer. When you're not focusing on praying, you will lose the joy of the service. So it's very practical advice, very, very practical advice. Being joyful in itself is evangelism. And I think that's probably along the same vein as Saint Seraphim when he said, acquire peace and thousands around you will be saved. There is very much an infectious nature if we are confessing that joy is a fruit of the Spirit. When the Holy Spirit, like he's a fire, and when he's burning, he is spreading, and he is creating community all the time. When you look at the book of Acts and Pentecost, and straight away 3,000 souls convert. It's not just for those 120 people or whatever that were in the house, but immediately he is spreading. Immediately he's working and spreading through those people. He is a fire. So if we are saying that the joy is coming from the Holy Spirit, then that also should be infectious, and we shouldn't question a statement like that when Father Dawood is saying being joyful itself is evangelism. Being joyful itself is preaching. And many of our youth that go into state have shared that people will ask them, like, why are you guys so like happy? Why are you so like, you're not coming with us to the parties and doing blah, 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 like why? And that, you know, it's like what he's saying. People are going to ask you for the reason. Like, what? There's something different about this person. And funnily enough, in the Orthodox Study Bible, like the older translation, it actually includes what that letter was, that decree was, to counteract the first one. And one of the verses, it says, and this is King Ahasuerus, you know, like talking about the whole narrative, explaining everything that's happened. He's saying we find them, the Jewish people, to be children of the Most High, most mighty living God, who has guided the kingdom both for us and forefathers in a most excellent manner. So, like, on that point, like, we should be very different. We should stand out. We should be very, very different to what's going on around us, because that in and of itself, when they're filled with His joy, is evangelism. And it's not the first time that, one of these Persian kings and one of these kings in the Old Testament is very much influenced by the people of God that find themselves in captivity or whatever, basically slavery to these kings. It's not the first time that they've been influenced in that way, and they've seen the hand of God and they've confessed, like Nebuchadnezzar saying, I have seen one in the fire like the Son of God. Like, what made him say that? It's actually quite strange when you think about it, because that phraseology is not very common in the Old Testament, especially from someone who is a pagan. So it's not the first time that one of these characters that have started out quite evil and, whatever, we can very easily point out their flaws. They have clearly seen the hand of God and have confessed these people belong to a different God, a God that can beat our gods and all the other gods. So this is something weird going on with these people. We don't really know what it is, and it's really not the first time. From Pharaoh onwards, we see that fact that they are seeing something different in the people of God. So we have to make sure that we are different. We have to make sure that we do stand out, and having that joy is definitely going to be one of those things. I'll just finish off really, because I haven't got that much else to share with, but it's a bit long. I'm sorry. This is the letter to Diognetus, which is dated 2nd or 3rd century. There's not much that is like historically confirmed about it, but we do know it's a historical document from one Greek author to a Greek recipient, but we don't know much about either of them. And there is also some scholarship that thinks that it might have been like to a fictional character, or whatever it may be, or that he might have been an advisor to Marcus Aurelius. There's different ideas out there. But either way, it describes Christianity in the early centuries from a Greek perspective, looking at the people of God. And this is what he says. I apologize, it's very long, but I'm going to be finished after this. He says, Christians are oh my God. What is wrong with me? I can't read today. Indistinguishable. You know what I'm saying. From other men, either by nationality, language, or customs. They do not inhabit separate cities of their own, or speak a strange dialect, or follow some outlandish way of life. Their teaching is not based upon reveries inspired by the curiosity of men. Unlike other people, they champion no purely human doctrine. With regard to dress, food, manner of life in general, they follow the customs of whatever city they happen to be living in, whether it is Greek or foreign. And yet there is something extraordinary about their lives. They live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. They play their full role as citizens, but labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. Like others, they marry and have children, but they do not expose them. They share their meals, but not their wives. That's funny. They live in the flesh, but they are not governed by the desires of the flesh. They pass their days upon the earth, but they are citizens of heaven. Obedient to the laws, yet they live on a level that transcends the law. Christians love all men, but all men persecute them. Condemned because they are not understood, they are put to death, but raised to life again. They live in poverty, but enrich many. And this is very similar to what St. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. They are totally destitute, but possess an abundance of everything. They suffer dishonor, but that is their glory. They are defamed, but vindicated. A blessing is their answer to abuse. Deference is their response to insult. For the good they do not receive the punishment of malefactors, but even they rejoice, as though receiving the gift of life. They are attacked by the Jewish as aliens, and they are persecuted by the Greeks, yet no one can explain the reason for this hatred. I'll skip a little bit. Christians love those who hate them, just as the soul loves the body and all its members, despite the body's hatred. It is by the soul enclosed within the body that the body is held together, and similarly, it is by the Christians detained in the world as in a prison that the world is held together. The soul, though immortal, has a mortal dwelling place, and Christians also live for a time amidst perishable things, while awaiting the freedom of change and decay that will be theirs in heaven. As the soul benefits from the deprivation of food and drink, so Christians flourish under persecution. Such is the Christian's lofty and divinely appointed function, from which he is not permitted to excuse himself. So I know it's very long, but it's very beautiful. Everything that he's written there is very profound, and it's capturing that angst that as Christians we should have, that we are in this world, but we are not of this world. And St. Paul talks in Romans about how we have like birth pangs, like we are groaning within ourselves, waiting for that time that we will leave this earth and go to our true home. As he says, our citizenship is in heaven, it's not here. And he's perfectly capturing that. And he's perfectly capturing how people can, when they see a genuine Christian, that is a very powerful preaching for them to see. And you know that famous quote that you might be the only Bible that someone reads. But it's very, very true. If we are genuine, if we follow the events and of the last couple of chapters and their meanings for our lives, and we are filled with his joy, really filled with his joy, that in and of itself is preaching. That in and of itself can win many souls to heaven. And we'll start conversations, because people will ask you, why are you different? People will ask you that. That's pretty much all I wanted to share. So if anyone has any questions or anything they want to add or discuss, because we have a small group, it'd be nice. But if not, I will go and sit down. Cool.
I've got a question if no one else has. Anyone have a question? No, okay, I've got a question. It's not directly related to today's chapter, but it's sort of like just an overall sort of look at what we've spoken about so far. It might be a little bit difficult, but like the only reason the Jews were in that position in the first place was because Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, right? And like obviously I understand his reasoning, but knowing that Haman, you know, just out of vengeance for Mordecai, like started this decree, would it have been wrong for Mordecai to just, you know, suck it up sort of thing? Like, I don't want to say it like that, but like, I mean, would it have been wrong for Mordecai if he had just said, okay, for the sake of my people, I'm just going to give this guy what he wants and bow to him when he comes into the street? Would that have been wrong? Or was there like, you know, obviously I'm not blaming Mordecai for the situation. I'm just saying like, you know, everyone, all his nations, all his people are going to suffer because of, you know, his enmity with Haman, even though he was righteous in that whole situation. But would it have been wrong for him to bow?
Yeah, that's a very great question. If anyone has an answer, that'd be good. But I guess it's very similar to the, you know, sometimes you hear the question like about martyrdom and like, would you like bow down just to save like your mum or your brother or whatever? Like, I guess it's kind of down the same vein. But if you look at, as you said, the whole book and all of Mordecai's actions and how that actually reveals the content of his character, the reason that he acted with so much courage and everything, and he was so black and white about everything, is because he had wholehearted belief in that promise of God, that they were his people and that basically God would back him up. So it wasn't so much that like, oh, well, listen, I need to think about the people for a second before I declare my loyalty to my God type of thing. Like, it wasn't even a decision for him almost, it seems. And he definitely had that belief that God would come through for him, and that finished for him in glory, which is symbolized by the robes and the purple. Like this is the color of royalty and the authority. And a lot of the fathers spend a lot of time on Mordecai, talking about how he is like Christ and how even before the Jewish people could have joy, he had to have the robes and the ring. It's kind of like Christ had to be seated at the right hand of the Father, that type of thing. So I think if we look at the book as a whole, we look at Mordecai, everything, all what we have of his speech and his actions, it's very clear that he was absolutely convicted that we are his people. He's going to defend us. He will deliver us from these pagans. So I don't think it was a fear that he had that what if there's this backlash, and which is very, very brave. Does anyone have anything to add to that? tough crowd, very tough crowd. Monday night's a tough crowd.
Any other questions?
Glory be to God.
All right, just before we stand up for prayer, just a few announcements. So we will have a prayer meeting in about 15 minutes. Next week, we'll be continuing the book of Esther with David Nada, giving us chapters 9 and 10. God willing, we won't end there. I know in your Bibles and in your books, the book of Esther stops at chapter 10, but there are some really beautiful chapters that we just couldn't pass up the opportunity to do in the Deuterocanonical book of Esther. So we'll continue with maybe a couple more weeks, just so that we can get a taste of these chapters. After the meeting today, we've also got a caramel cake and what looks like chocolate balls. I'm actually not sure what they are, but they look amazing. The caramel cake, I will say, tastes amazing. I had a few slices on the way. So stick around for that. And like I said, prayer meeting will be in about 15 minutes. So we'll just stand up for prayer really quickly. Have mercy, have mercy, have mercy on us, O God, our Father. Have mercy, have mercy, have mercy on us, O God, our Savior. Have mercy, have mercy, have mercy on us, O God, and have mercy, Lord, have mercy. Lord, hear us as we cry out with one voice saying, Our Father, who art in heaven.